I could take it further and say the reason why people believe in the state is they don't feel like adults. They don't feel like they're ready to make a good living. They don't feel like they're ready to um, attract the right partner, and they don't feel like they're ready to protect themselves if someone attacks them. And so even if they don't know that, their body knows it, and their psychology is affected by that. If a tiger came up after you, you wouldn't be able to run up a tree to save yourself from it eating you. Now, you might not care or think about that, but your body knows it because this body was evolved to be lean, muscular, and to be able to defend itself. So if you've not got these things, you feel insecure. So what happens when you feel insecure? You want someone to protect you, and who's the ultimate projection of that? It's the state. So I think a truly empowered society, or rather a society full of truly empowered individuals, would not have such great demands for the state, or even non-state abuses which we allow. If you want to contribute to that, great way, become a good example.
All right, listeners, and welcome back to Subversion. I have joined with me today Antony Sammeroff of the Scottish Liberty podcast. How you doing, Antony?
Great. Thanks for having me on your show, Trey. Nice to speak to you.
Absolutely, and likewise. Yeah, I've heard you on a couple other shows that I listen to, and I thought that I'd reach out to you and get you on the show to chat, just because you seem like such a interesting person to talk to. As we were talking before the show, there's going to be no shortage of topics here. So yeah, I guess I'd just like to start by kind of asking you, how'd you get involved in libertarianism? How did these ideas appeal to you?
Well, I was already quite a free-thinking person, although I would have definitely identified left of center politically. I thought I was a bit of a radical. I didn't adhere fully to the left-wing program. In fact, even then I was skeptical about things like, say, gun control, and I was involved in reading about conspiracies and heard about the Federal Reserve and central banks, and I thought that was shocking, but it seemed like the left wing didn't really address those issues for some reason, which was weird to me because you'd think, well, this is such a flagrant abuse of power. Um, I guess I was searching for the truth, and I started putting out some videos on YouTube of things I'd learned, but from, let's say, what you'd call a progressive perspective, although that word wasn't commonly used, especially not in the UK at the time. We didn't even use liberal in the UK very often. It was really left or right we tended to use. Um, then, yeah, I guess Ron Paul came on the scene about conversion with this. It's about 2007, and he was very well spoken, and the first right winger I ever heard of that was against the war and against the surveillance state as well. Like, for me, I was given this package deal. If you were left wing, then you were against the war and you were for civil liberties, and you were, therefore I must be against capitalism. Although I would have said I was for a mixed economy, let's say, well regulated capitalism. I wasn't an out and out socialist. And then if you were on the right, well, then you must be for the war. You're for an authoritarian approach to crime, to drugs, and of course you're pro-capitalist. So those were the package deals I was offered, and Ron Paul really shattered that. But I listened to him and I learned from him, but I didn't become a libertarian just like that. It took a couple of years of people gatecrashing my YouTube channel, arguing with me, sending me to videos, and I listened and I learned more and more and more, and I became a voluntarist anarchist, an anarcho-capitalist eventually. First, I just identified as an anarchist, and then I I guess I just kept on reading and researching, and I ran out of excuses. I just became gradually more and more libertarian.
Sure. And man, a lot of that sounds so familiar to my own story. I mean, I was sort of raised a progressive myself, especially in, I was a teenager coming to adulthood during the Bush administration. So, naturally you have as a teenager just this, and it just regardless of the generation that I'm in or anything like that, it's just the spirit of being young is sort of rebellious, right? So you see this regime that has control in your country that you live in your whole young adult life when you're coming to age. And, I just thought I had it all figured out. And I remember, I don't know, a friend of mine had brought up a Ron Paul video, and I don't know, it was something, the word capitalism came up, and I remember distinctly, um, saying something like, negative about capitalism, and my friend just kind of pushed me and was like, "Do you even know what that is?" Like, I totally didn't. So and then, yeah, I mean, I went down a rabbit hole myself. I saw the video of Ron Paul beating Rudy Giuliani on the debate stage, and I think it was probably the first time that I realized that there was such thing as an anti-war movement on the right. So yeah, a lot of overlap there in our experience coming to libertarianism there.
Right, and it's just as well that you mentioned the Bush thing because I never really thought of it well like that before. But during that period, I mean, those people like Cheney and Rumsfeld were so flagrantly evil, and they didn't even put a nice face on it. So around that time, it seemed to me like there was a big movement, there was a convergence, and it was largely on the left, um, but not exclusively. I guess you had more right-wing forces marshaled by the conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones, but there seemed to be a movement that was for liberty. I don't know if it was for libertarianism. It looked like that. It looked like people were getting activized, and they weren't the kind of violent people who are opposing Trump. Don't get me wrong, I'm not at all a Trump fan, but you see this new brand of leftist, which are quick to violence, the whole Antifa thing, and they'd be so happy if Trump got impeached, even if it created a civil war, because they're ideologically motivated. Under Bush, it wasn't clear that this so-called anti-war movement was just an anti-Bush, an anti-right movement. It wasn't until Obama got in and basically continued the Bush doctrine overseas, continued the surveillance state, and everything he said he wouldn't do, he continued. Then it became more and more obvious that this movement, which seemed young and full of energy and to devoted to creating a more just order under Bush, which was inspired by the foreign invasions, was really not not what it promised to be. There was so much energy around then, and I really believed in it. I really believed that there was an awakening happening, and I suppose there was. It's just not to the extent we've seen, because I mean, must be in the last 10 years since I've become a libertarian, there must be hundreds of times as many libertarians as there were now uh, back then. Must be so many more of us, but we're still as a percentage of the population less than 0.1%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, it can be a kind of a sad prospect when you've been devoting your life and your moral code to this to this axiom of non-aggression, for most of our lives, and it can feel really discouraging when we seem like such a minority still. But and this sort of brings up a topic that I've been trying to hash this out a lot myself. That a lot of people, especially in America, we have this sort of fetishization with if you don't like the political system, you just have to get involved in it and change it kind of from the inside. And I don't know, I'm starting to kind of think that the nature of what libertarianism is sort of begets um, people being turned off to it in a political sense because we aren't offering some sort of answer. We're
That's right.
offering several different answers that we should all discover during
Yes,
the course of the discovery of spontaneous order. Um,
indeed.
yeah.
And
So
that's
go ahead.
that's a hard sell because if you're a conservative or socialist, someone comes to you and says, "Well, what would you do about crime in your ideal society?" And you're like, "Here's my platform," and you can lay it out. And we have to say something like, "Well, it depends. Well, the market provides. We don't really know the right answer, but the combined genius of humanity will test, and over time, the best will win out and the poor solution." Do you know what I mean? What would education look and like in your society? Well, here's what I've got to say as a socialist. Here's what I'll promise you. I'll promise you the earth. Or as a conservative, we just need to be more strict on kids again. We're just too loose, right? So there should be more discipline in the schools, and then the grades will go up again. That's easy to say, but for us to say, well, the thing is, we know the schools are bad, but no one knows the best way to educate kids. But lots of people know some ways, and people will start their own schools, and the best practices will emerge, and people who have good ideas will get successful, and other schools will copy those ideas. And that's just too much unpredictability for people. People are risk averse, and you need to actually study libertarianism for quite a long time before you get to realize that, see, if you're truly risk averse, then you're going to want to be a libertarian. You're not really going to want to give that much power to a bunch of central planners because no one has the information to make good decisions on such a good scale. I mean, I had a great example come out of my mouth randomly when I was doing a show the other day, which is the baker on your street knows roughly how much white bread and brown bread and rye bread and of each kind of thing is bought each day. And even still, he'll need to throw things away, and sometimes he won't cook enough of this cake to meet the demand on a day, but he can best guess because he does it day in, day out. So imagine trying to do that for an entire economy. Who's got the information to know? And you just apply that to the schools or the hospitals or anything that the state runs, and it becomes clear that it's an impossible task, to centrally plan an economy. And yet, the idea still remains popular. And I guess people don't, broadly speaking, go out their way to discover this information. So you need to make it visible to people if you want, and tease them, pique their interest, tell them something cool, tell them a cool fact or something interesting. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I'd like to hear more. And if you see that spark of enthusiasm, then maybe you can teach them more. And some people just think they know it all already and will dismiss you out of hand. So I guess you kind of have to choose your battles.
Right. And I don't know that I've actually ever got someone kind of completely on board with libertarianism, but I've certainly gotten people to think about things a lot differently. Um, I mean, I can't think of any big wins off the top of my head, but I mean, I've seen the gears turning in people's heads when I ask them the difficult questions about, you know, just the general morality of interventionism. Because for me, uh, the anti-war, uh, position is probably what I care about the most. I mean, if we're going to talk about, um, the worst things that happen in the world, it all comes down to the the lack of respect for property rights, and what bigger display of destruction of property, and included in property, I include people and their bodies, that other than just this massive bureaucracy that makes decisions on who to bomb, and it's becoming robots that are making those decisions. Even, I mean, they basically have a conspiracy theory algorithm that takes in metadata of all cell phone calls in a given place, like Yemen and Afghanistan, and people who are, we've all heard of Kevin Bacon's, uh, 7 degrees of separation or whatever. You can make a case about pretty much anyone from metadata just by guilt by association, and you know I don't know. That's just one area where I think I still at least have the ear of my progressive friends who make up a majority of my social network. In fact, is by continuing. I mean, I guess maybe that's, other than just the moral thing, that's what I found strategically works best for me. Um, but I mean, I guess just to get specific on what's going on over there across the pond, I mean, you talked about the word liberal earlier, which, to my knowledge, overseas that means conservative, more or less. So it's kind of funny in America we've got a little bit of a different lexicon. Libertarian here in America means someone who's pro-capitalist and pro-gun and against the federal government for the most part. I mean, we both know what we would consider like the root of American libertarianism would be, to its furthest logical conclusion, would be anarcho-capitalism. But setting aside the purity, American libertarianism is of the right. Whereas when you say libertarianism across the pond, you're talking about anarcho-communism. So, I mean, do you
Well,
even?
you were once, to be honest. What were you going to say?
All I was going to say is, like, do you even self-identify as a libertarian over there, or does that just sort of confuse people as to where you're coming from?
Really, the only usage of libertarian here now, if it ever gets used, is to mean what you mean in the States by it. Because although there was a time when libertarian meant an anarcho-communist, it's whoever used the word, because there were so few anarcho-communists. So most people here, when I became a libertarian, no one here knew the word, so I just said I was an anarchist, and then people would get more of an idea of what I meant. In the last couple of years, I've begun to self-identify as a libertarian, and I guess that's maybe because I met some other ones. I was the only libertarian I knew for many, many, many years. So, and then I joined the Scottish Libertarian Party. Even though I'm not that into political action myself, I thought it might be a good vehicle for spreading ideas. And so gradually, I began to say I was a libertarian, and I'm okay with that. Liberal doesn't really mean conservative here exactly. I mean, most people would understand that as somewhere. I guess the distinction would be here, if you're a liberal, you are for a mixed economy and regulation of the market by the government, and maybe some things socialized. That would distinguish you from a socialist, would be someone that was more radically left wing than that. So I guess you would probably consider yourself to be a centrist if you called yourself a liberal. We have a party called the Liberal Democrats, but in a way, all of the parties are left wing because they're all statists. I'm not really sure that I would like to consider myself on the right as a libertarian, particularly because of the history of the usage of the word right, and I traditionally, this is right up to Obama, the package deal was carved up that way, that if you were on the right, you were more pro-war, more hawkish, and also more for the surveillance state. Margaret Thatcher, the conservative, our most famous conservative prime minister, um, was big on detention without trial, and she wasn't exactly an ideological free marketeer either. I mean, the right have uh, often advocated paternalistic policies, especially towards, getting people off alcohol and in terms of not really just looking down on the poor, really. Oh, they drink. We can't have these poor people drinking too much. In the history of my nation, the government should step in and do something about this sort of thing, prostitution, um, and these sort of things. The right is not really a well-defined ideology. In fact, if anything, it's just been whatever's not the left. So I guess as a libertarian, I consider myself neither left nor right. As Shakespeare said, a plague on both your houses. And I like to identify as neither left nor right. Some people might disagree with that because I'm for capitalism. I think traditionally, the left is more coherent because they've got certain main holy cows. Holy cow! One is well, basically equality and egalitarianism, I think, are the main values of the left. And it's not like the right necessarily were against equality in all places at all times, but it wasn't a primary value to them, whereas the left have and yeah, as you say, the usage of these words really has varied through time. So I guess it depends how you define right wing. At the end of the day, that's it. I think that the spectrum itself. I'm not going to say it's not without its uses. It does have its uses, but I don't think that it was created for people like us. You know, it, being able to give people these package deals is a very convenient way to make sure that everyone is confused on at least some issues. The right will want more government in some respects, and the left want more government in some respects. But what happens is when a left wing administration gets in, you get more government in all the ways that they want it, but you don't get less government in the ways they claim to want it. And the same happens when you get in a right wing administration into power. They still increase the size of a government. I mean, Ronald Reagan, uh, the supposed hero of small government conservatism, I believe he increased the national debt by more than his seven predecessors put together. So he wasn't a small government guy in practice. He did cut taxes, but he didn't cut spending. So yeah, I guess I know I've gone on a massive rant, but I'm just wondering if as libertarians our best bet is is to actually be saying no, we're this other thing. We're out on the third wing, and yes, there's something that we agree with the left on, and there's something we agree with the right on, and we're for capitalism, but it's not the same capitalism as the right because it's crony capitalism. They like protectionism and trade tariffs, and they don't want to import things from poor countries because they're taking our jobs. We're for, and we want an even playing field. We don't want the government to be in bed with big business. It's a different kind of capitalism from what you see now, where the government is basically handing out preferential treatments and contracts to lobbyists. We agree that that is corrupt. So I guess brand differentiation, maybe that's what it is, or maybe just because I came from the left, and I have certain. I mean, I've been going on for ages, but I just want to say, like, when I be first. When I first became a libertarian, I really thought that libertarianism had far more affinity with the left than the right, because I thought we were very much against this concentration of power, which the left were. But remember, when I became a libertarian, this is circa 2010, so after 2 years of study. So, yeah, you're looking at that and going, um, since then, I feel more affinity. Well, I just feel there's more we have in common with the right now, but I didn't feel like that was the case when I first became a libertarian because it was still under the Bush years, and even in the beginning of the Obama. I mean, John McCain versus Obama. Obama says he's going to make a change. Probably don't believe him, but I'm going to flip a coin. Well, I mean, if I'm a betting man, I'm going to say that Obama's the lesser of two evils because John McCain openly says stuff like he wants to bomb Iran. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
so
And
it's kind of like, go on.
I was just going to say, I don't necessarily disagree with anything you said. And I think
Mm,
I do sort of get myself into some trouble when I say, that American libertarianism is, on the right. And I guess when I say that, what I meant was just, in the typical, four quadrant political compass
right.
that's,
Oh
um,
yeah, I see that.
and I just sent you a link to something called the Pornell chart. I don't know if you've seen this before, but it's it's a bit of a different political compass that I find. I'm not sure that it necessarily is an objective truth, and neither is the political spectrum that we commonly use. Because on any given issue, even ourselves as rather consistent libertarians, I'm sure there are some issues where we care
Mm,
about things a little bit differently and maybe
for sure.
parse them from our different value scales, and you could potentially your dot could potentially move on that gradient pretty easily. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, I really do cringe at people like Gary Johnson who try to say,
Mm,
oh well, libertarianism is the best of the right and the best of the left, and we just
mm.
take them both and roll them up into this really great philosophy. No, it's something
No,
completely different because
no.
in the modern day, the left and the right both are basically progressives who are
Mm,
willing to abandon property rights at the first sign of any sort of utilitarian whim. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying there, and
yeah,
we have these
libertarian.
trappings of left and right in America too that really confuse the issues and make them a binary thing. When, really, it's kind of hard to do sometimes. But in all actuality, as a libertarian, seems like I'm like adverse to everybody, you know, because
Yeah,
we're
it sometimes seems that way.
we like you said we're part of the 0.01%.
Mm,
So but really in actuality I'm for like unity of people in under this like axiom of not hurting each other, not taking their stuff.
right.
So yeah, I mean I think that we want the same goals as liberals and conservatives, but we actually have a consistent manner in which we're willing to carry out you know uh, taking over the world to leave everyone alone, as it were.
Right. Right. Yes, and I appreciate you saying that because we've got our own intellectual lineage and we have common ancestors with both the left and the right, if you like. But there's a distinct line of thought, through Locke, through Thomas Jefferson, um, Adam Smith, uh, and the Austrian economist Murray Rothbard, also being influenced himself by Ayn Rand, his contemporary. Um, there's a lot of stuff. There is a lineage of thought. Ayn Rand saw herself as a product of the Enlightenment, as continuing the Enlightenment project, and there's an intellectual history there that is distinct and has its common ancestors with both the left and the right, but it's own distinct philosophy, and it's very, very rigorous in terms of its dedication to principle. And really, it's very quite new historically speaking. I mean, if you want to say we should have a separation of church and state a few hundred years ago, it's like, what, are you crazy? We're talking about people's souls here. They're going to go, you do realize they're going to go to hell. We can't have people espousing atheism, because it's not about them. I mean, they're going to go to hell anyway. It's the fact that they might also influence other people to be atheists, and then they're going to go to hell. So no thanks. You can keep your separation of church and state to yourself, kind of thing. you know and it was James Madison who's very influential in um, enshrining the freedom re- of religion into American culture. And the Randists like to say that the Declaration of Independence was the most important political doctrine ever written, document ever written, because it explicitly states that the individual has a right to pursue their own interests, to pursue happiness, the most libertarian idea, you know, that your life for you to pursue your own happiness, not the happiness of the tribe, not the happiness of the community. Not that we're against that, you know, but we think like Adam Smith, you know, it's not from the benevolence of the baker that we get bread. Like, you know, my hero, Frederick Bastiat, French economist, for anyone who wants an introduction, check out, I think you can get a book called Essays in Political Economy. He wrote extensively about how the interests of men were not antagonistic, about how they were mutually beneficial, and this is so important to us as libertarians. The old one, if I swap you a pen for a tie, you obviously prefer the pen, I prefer the tie. A revolutionary idea seems so simple, but remember, how new is this? Because it's your duty to get married to who your parents say. It's your duty to do the job that your parents did, and your labour belongs to your Lord. It's your duty to go to war because the kingdom needs to be enriched. That's most of human history since the invention of agriculture. So don't feel too downhearted that there's only like 0.1% or less of us, because our ideas are so new, and it's very, very easy for us to forget that because we're immersed in this culture. And some of the freedoms, you know, we got from this, we wrestled, but most of it's because of wealth. I mean, a couple of hundred years ago, most people would have been working for 61 hours a week on a farm. So even putting aside the political freedom to vote, which, you know, we as libertarians, we can debate if it was even a good idea, or the freedom to marry who you choose, or the freedom to choose your own profession, or the freedom not to give your labor to the feudal lord, the leisure time you enjoy working an average of 38 hours a week rather than 61, the fact that you've got an income to spend on entertainment, on entertaining yourself, all of this is new. And I think that's why we're really struggling as a species, because we're suffering for our freedom because our institutions, our schools, our parenting is not equipped to prepare us for the amount of freedom we have in our life. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And
That going.
I was just going to say there's a lot to unpack there. And you had brought up Ayn Rand, who she, she's very Aristotelian, but the one major change that she sort of, created a little bit of a deviation from the traditional Aristotelian philosophy is that, the master slave mentality being like this sort of genetic and inherent thing is BS. She was basically, and that was her huge um, problem with Friedrich Nietzsche. She was a major critic of Nietzsche for this very idea that that he purported that that there's a natural tendency for slaves to be slaves and masters to be masters, and she really took that sort of one of those principles that were taken for granted during the Enlightenment and sort of critiqued it for some sort of consistency, and yeah, I mean the same with Bastiat for his time. The the material that he put out, it reads like a proto Rothbard. Really is sort of ahead of its time in the critiques that he's
It's
making
so
about the
far
state.
ahead of his time.
And yeah, I mean, a lot of minarchists like to use Bastiat and Adam Smith as these examples that minarchism is correct because these guys are so correct. But I don't know. I almost think that they were in the time that they were in, and we live in an age where we don't rely on some sort of centralized force to get information from here to there. Information delivery is very decentralized now. So, I mean, that was a huge part of why the state needed to exist to some of these people, is because there was no other institution that could be trusted to be at least even remotely impartial or even get these things done. So I can kind of see how they would be minarchists in the 1800s, but nowadays it's just kind of like, well, I think that this apparatus of monopoly on violence has sort of outlived its time, much like religion. In my point of view, I mean, I'm an atheist, so I see that religion is sort of something that is no longer relevant to my life necessarily, as the ritual itself. I definitely, just to get sidetracked on that whole thing, I do see that there is a value in this in the whole puzzle piece of what makes a human and what makes humankind. I would never, sort of deny the philosophical underpinnings of what religion is. But anyway, all I'm trying to say is that this was sort of a unifying cultural force back in the biblical days. And I'm not necessarily sure that we can impart any sort of specific knowledge about the world today from, how to wash your feet correctly, or, which animals you can eat. So anyway, basically what I was trying to get at when I brought up Ayn Rand was reading Ayn Rand was a really formative part of my life, where I almost, from reading The Virtue of Selfishness, it clicked for me what self-interest was, and how a lot of the problems in my own life had to do with not caring enough for myself. And it wasn't that I was completely selfless and devoting my life to other people, but I wasn't doing a good enough job of fixing myself. And it's almost become a meme now. Jordan Peterson, that is, his whole like clean your room thing. But in that little phrase, clean your room, there's a lot more there. There's something very deep, very primal about that, and about the nature of what a human is. And I think that's sort of, just to get right to the point, you're a therapist, and I think you've made a really great contribution in some of the work that you put out with Be Yourself and Love It. And sort of what you're getting at is this, to take control of your life and to love yourself. And, and I guess when you get to this sort of critical mass with that phenomenon, right, then that sort of has a downstream effect on the quote unquote collective. As I'm sure you would agree, there is no sort of, the collective doesn't act. That is innumerable numbers of cogs that are working, so many individuals working in synchronicity to make a quote unquote collective. So yeah, I mean, just from the sheer catharsis of the lesson that individualism imparts onto people, I'm just sort of curious, and I think I already know the answer to this question, but how has libertarianism informed your work as a therapist?
Well, interesting. You said you think you know. I'd love to hear what your conclusion you've come to, and I'll use that as a sounding board.
Um,
As a s-
Go
yeah.
ahead.
How do you think?
Well, it's from what I've understood as to the direction you're going with procrastination, annihilation, and just your general self-help course. If you don't mind me using that term, is that what you would? I hope you don't feel
Yeah,
slighted
yeah,
by
yeah.
using that term, because it's
No,
sort
no,
of like
not at all.
it's like a loaded thing, right? Like,
You have to call it something. Do you
right?
know what I mean? You can call it personal development, self-help, human enrichment. You can call it, you have to call it something.
Right.
So,
Okay. Well, anyway, you very clearly show that you were an imperfect person in this, which I feel like in the self help sort of area, there's this sort of like there's like this argument from authority that the author is always speaking from, that that he's got it all figured out and he has the answers. If you just go through this specific ritual every morning, you will be a successful you know, CEO of a startup in Silicon Valley or something like that. You
Yeah,
know what
but
I
what
mean?
if you can't? What if you can't do the same as he's done?
Yeah.
What if you can't bring yourself to do it? So that's the problem that I try and solve in my free book, Procrastination and Annihilation, which people can get at beyourselfandloveit.com/do it. But please continue with what you were saying.
You are sort of getting extracting out of the reader the machinations or the process within themselves that can work for them. And I think that's very much in the spirit of what we would consider a quote unquote free market, or just the market in general, which doesn't need any sort of uh, prescription. It just happens, you know? And it's almost like you're trying um, to cultivate an organic form of order and self love in the direction that you're sort of going with the material that you're putting out for therapy. Where am I wrong and where am I right?
I don't know, it's nice to hear you speak about it. I really appreciate that. I think, yeah, I don't even know what to say. You're completely right in the fact that the individual acts, the collective doesn't act. And whether you want to improve the world or you want to step into the world and know that you've got what it takes to make your dreams happen, or to create a product, or to write a book, or uh, a song, or go out and meet a great woman, or something. You just turned up here, and even if you want to be a tool for improving the world, you need to sharpen your tool, right? And it's just for people to realize that as individuals, like, this is it, this is your life. Like, take it seriously. If you do that, it's just like you mentioned Jordan Peterson. He says something really great, tidy up your room, because work to become a responsible person. Even for altruistic reasons, you can do that, because then when someone in the family dies, you're capable of organizing the funeral, and that's a load off everyone else's back. Do you know what I mean? And it's like people are very caught up in, say, politics, for example, as a means of changing the world. And fine, okay, we all do it sometimes. It would be nice to spend half as much time as you're spending on politics improving your own life, because if your own life's improved, then you'll be more of a help to the people around you. Not that the only reason why you should do it is because it's helpful to the people around you, but if you need that as an excuse to help yourself, it can help people along. Ayn Rand's lover, Nathaniel, for a short time, Nathaniel Branden, he was very prominent self-help author, and he wrote on largely on the philosophy of self-esteem and self-love, the psychology um, of those in romantic love. And I think he really was talking about taking responsibility and how your life's important. I mean, if you can put it in a libertarian sort of context, most of the restraints on your life, if you're lucky enough to live in a first world country, are internal rather than external. You want to uh, write a book, but you're too anxious, or you're not a good enough writer, or you can't get you feel foggy in the morning, or you want to go out and attract a nice woman, but you eat badly, and you don't take any exercise, and you're socially anxious, and you know whatever it is, you want to be able to play guitar like Eric Clapton, but you don't have the attention span. Whatever it is, right? It's not the government stopping you from achieving your dreams, it's your own, it's yourself. And you want to get good relationships, good friends that will support you. So I guess that's my libertarian take on it. I feel I could take it further and say the reason why people believe in the state is they don't feel like adults. They don't feel like they're ready to make a good living. They don't feel like they're ready to um, attract the right partner, and they don't feel like they're ready to protect themselves if someone attacks them. And so even if they don't know that, their body knows it, and their psychology is affected by that. I'm working on my body because I've been a weedy guy my whole life, but if a tiger came up after you, you wouldn't be able to run up a tree to save yourself from it eating you. Now, you might not care or think about that, but your body knows it because this body was evolved to be lean, muscular, and to be able to defend itself. So if you've not got these things, you feel insecure. So what happens when you feel insecure? You want someone to protect you, and who's the ultimate projection of that? It's the state. So I think a truly empowered society, or rather a society full of truly empowered individuals, would not have such great demands for the state or even non-state abuses which we allow, and um, so if you want to contribute to that, great way, become a good example. Live your life well, sharpen your tool, bring yourself to your potential, show people what they can do with their life and teach them. If you learn anything useful, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with people.
Yeah, and I mean, just setting aside just even libertarianism, just like in your interactions with people, people who want to manipulate you, people who want to take advantage of you, they're relying on your own insecurity and your own lack of confidence in yourself to take advantage of you and make you do things that you potentially wouldn't do for them. So I would even say that, I mean, I'm not trying to like pigeonhole your work, too much into libertarianism because it's a lot more than that. It's just about like being your own damn person and and yeah, just like taking control of your own life. And I can think of no better way to give people who want to see you fail the middle finger than just to like go and do it, man. So yeah, I just love and I love this sort of like self help kind of um, phenomenon. And if I could, I'd like to tell you a little bit of background about myself. So when I was younger, I've always had problems. Like I was diagnosed with ADHD. So I mean, as I've become an adult, I've had to deal with a lot of you know symptoms downstream from that. I've never necessarily went to a psychiatrist ever since I was a teenager, but I wasn't on insurance as a young person and things like that. So I never really had access to any sort of like professional uh, mental health. And, I almost think that that's for the better. At least for my own self, I didn't have any sort of like deeply neurotic or psychotic problems. So luckily for me, self help was an option. I had I just kind of went on a bender of reading self help books and a lot of really interesting ones from like the 60s, like Freudian psychology, like hypnosis books and things like that. Just all kinds of interesting stuff. And just taking, even if I only got one little nugget of wisdom from some sort of irrelevant book, I could apply that to my own life and sort of built this self defense mechanism from all of these self help books that I read. And I mean, some of them were really weren't even self help books, like a philosophy book that I had on the phenomenon of paradox. That was really surprisingly a really formative read for me. I read a book on just the concept of solitude and how, that was really something that like solidified my individualist tendencies. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there's a really big role to play as a type of media in the self help field. I'm just really thrilled to see a fellow libertarian being able to get into that because I worry that sometimes libertarians come off as this cold, inhuman sort of movement, and I can see why because we're all so intellectually rigorous and we all want to win arguments so hard that I think people just normies, if you will, are a little bit confused by us and sort of think that we don't necessarily care about other people, but I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, the way I see it and the way that my fellow libertarians see it, we're the vanguard of individual freedom. So, I mean, yeah, I just really like seeing people putting out the tools for people to help themselves. So yeah, not really a question there, just sort of spitballing.
Oh no, I deeply appreciate that. Please spitball away. Yeah, no, it's music to my ears, man. So
And
Yeah, and go on.
and I was just gonna say, like, I mean, just from reading like the intro to your ebook, you're talking about all these creative endeavors that you've had in your life, and um, it's just it just shows the human side of people within this movement. So I just really like seeing like you, for example. I mean, just picking one of the examples when you were young, you gave a demo CD to a DJ, and you could have gotten yourself, you could have, sort of gotten into some sort of music career at that time in the electronic world, and so yeah, I mean, there are just all sorts of. One of the lessons that I see just in the intro here is just sort of you showing these missed opportunities in your own life, and sort of reflecting on, not like a regret necessarily, but if you would have done things differently, and that's how we learn, right? I mean, we look back at our the mistakes that we feel like we've made, and improve on our behavior to so that that pain doesn't happen again. What's
You
that?
better because there's no going back. So
Yeah, exactly. Time is linear and it only goes one direction. so
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, just what does all of this mean to you, Antony?
I guess I would like people to get the useful stuff that I've learned without going through as much suffering as I've gone through to learn it. I think that's the bottom line. Like, some of the suffering was necessary, but a lot of it wasn't. And if I'd had someone wise around to point me in the right directions, yeah, I still probably would have made mistakes, and sometimes I'd ignore that person. But it would definitely have saved me from making that mistake once, 2 or 3 times more, because I'd go, oh, damn, that person was right. I should have listened harder. And yeah, this book, Procrastination Annihilation, it's free. Get it at beyourselfandloveit.com/do it. As you can as you alluded to, I mentioned some of the ways that procrastination made me miss opportunities. There's nothing in it that presents me as bulletproof. And I know the methods in the book work because they are how I personally went from being very, very procrastinatory to much, much less procrastinatory, and continue that work. And it's a very practical method. There's nothing like woo woo, or there's no miracles. It's not going to take you from being a chronic procrastinator to being super productive overnight, but that just goes to show that it's a realistic method. It's a method for helping you become gradually more and more and more conscientious, and if you apply the method, you will definitely improve. You don't go from, like, being a weedy guy to being buff in the gym just because you go 3 times a week for the next month. And it's the same as that. It's more like a gym for conscientiousness. It gives you the exercises that you can take at your own pace to gradually build up your muscles. And really, it's the best thing I've written so far. I mean, it took me 15 years of writing to be able to write this book because, if I may say so, the tone is lovely, delicious, easy to read. It spreads like butter. It takes effort to come across that effortless, and I doubt that I could have done it a year earlier. My writing's always improving. It's short. You can read it in 2 hours, so you will enjoy to read. It's got jokes in it, and it's got a nice structure. I begin by telling my story and my struggles with procrastination, and then I go into a section on the kind of mindsets that you may experience and that might get you down if you're a procrastinator. And then I go on to the practical nuts and bolts. Not that the psychological part isn't practical as well. In fact, most of the emails I've gotten feedback on the book have been to say, this section, they copy me a section. It's like you're reading my mind. Like, I've had quite a few emails saying that, which is very satisfying. So what it means to me is an opportunity for people to live more of their potential, give their gifts, take their life seriously and be able to live the life they imagine for themselves. Because if we get everyone doing that, or more people doing that, everyone else stands to gain. We stand to gain from you giving your gifts. And I would like, we're here for such a short time. It would be nice, if you've got an idea, if you could take yourself to the conscientiousness gem so that you can bring that idea to fruition.
Absolutely. And I am going to have to dedicate myself to read this book because, like I told you, I didn't necessarily read it before we had this conversation, but I really do need it. I mean, just this experience with getting ready for this interview is sort of proof to me that that I definitely could stand to gain from this. And as I was looking through, one of the tenets of the book is meditation, which is something that that was one of the useful tools that I got from self-help books that I was talking about. Just being able, and especially with the unique problems that I have with my own brain chemistry and things like that, I need time to recharge, and I don't ever think that I need it when I've got all of these tasks that I need to complete. But to realize that by taking an extra 10, 20 minutes out of a day and just focusing on your breath can really make you a much more, you get a lot more profit out of life, as it were, if you're if you could take those, just small little routines in your day to give yourself time to center yourself. So, I mean, yeah, this is all really reminiscent of some wisdom that I could reignite from reading in the past when I was trying to learn how to become an adult. So yeah, I mean, just as far as my perception on the book and the importance of it, there's yeah.
Yeah, I think you will enjoy.
I've got to get into
I
it.
think you'll enjoy it. Don't turn it into a chore, because if you turn it into a chore, you won't want to read it. Just
Absolutely.
read 20 pages there or so, and 10 pages. There's some jokes right up front. So once you get into the tone of it, you'll want to continue reading, I'm sure. I have a podcast on personal development issues. Be Yourself and Love It podcast. Those who listen can find it on iTunes. If you want, you can download the book first, beyourselfandloveit.com/do it, and it's got links to everything inside the ebook. So, for those who would like to hear more from me, I'd be more than happy to furnish you with more media in between listening to Subversion podcast, of course.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to sit down and talk to me, Antony. This has been really great, and I hope to talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, wonderful. I've had a really lovely time, Trey, and thank you so much for inviting me in your show. And I've just really, really enjoyed myself.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe on your way out and find us on Facebook at facebook.com/subversionwebcast.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com. Sammeroff.com.